I was just at a dialogue and I had this sense to come and dialogue with myself about some insights I might have had. And it seems like the wind wants to talk to me too. And the spot is nice and shady, it's really warm, and I do like the warm, but it doesn't go well with technology. My phone feels like it's gonna explode because it's so hot. Plus the sun shines in my face, or it's shining in the screen. Blah, blah, blah. And we were talking about social responsibility and sort of some of the debacles in the world right now. And there was this I'm not sure, I don't generally talk about dialogues I have, because generally I don't have dialogues with other people but myself. So I'm not sure if I want to give the context of the dialogue or just the insight that I had, but I'm sensing that I came up with a question: what happens when we don't see any problems? Because there's the whole idea about problems out in society and what can we do about them. But if we meet another person with the background of the problems of society, we're not really meeting that other person. And if our awareness is focused on the problems of society, then that will prevent action in the moment, because we're not responding to the moment, we're responding to the programs of societal problems we've been trained to respond to through media. And when we have that in our awareness, there's no way we can act fully adequately in the moment. So what happens when we don't see any problems? And that's not to say there aren't any problems. But if we're meeting the moment with past problems, we can't meet the moment and solve a problem in the moment that's actually there. We can't even see that problem, if there is one. So Krishnamurti would say the brain has to be free of all problems in order to solve problems. So if our brain is full of problems and we meet the moment, we can't solve anything. And I wrote down that problems are just words. So I could be thinking about the words of the problems of society right now. That's just a bunch of words, and what's actual is what's right in front of me. And I think I want to go through some of it quickly because there's so much of it, and I don't want to be editing videos too much. Maybe one a day, not two. And I was thinking about thoughts and how when our thoughts are continuously going, they lull us to sleep, just like TV noise when we're falling asleep. It'll make us go to sleep for a lot of people. Whereas if we're just about to sleep and somebody comes in the room and turns the TV on, it's going to wake us up. So I was thinking that when there's more space between thoughts, then arising thoughts might actually have more of a waking up effect. But when they are droning on constantly and repeating, then they actually just lull us to sleep. And I was only thinking about that in terms of maybe thought appeared in evolution or in the consciousness of human beings as a warning system. And there was some element of being able to predict and think about things. But it has taken on a life of its own and established that there's this me thinking, when really it could just be thoughts arising in consciousness that have some value if they're spaced apart. But if there's no space, it drones on, and then we're actually asleep while we're awake, because that thought stuff is going on and our attention is on it, so we actually feel like we are awake, because it is supposed to wake us up in a way. Not supposed to, but originally it was to perhaps help keep us alert, just like somebody coming in and turning on the TV right when we're about to fall asleep. It would wake us up, it would be a jolt. But it's no longer a jolt, because it's just one after another after another. So perhaps thought with lots of space, with no thinker. So there's no problem with thought innately, but to think there's somebody thinking the thoughts. And that happens when there's no space between the thoughts. Because the non-space, the constant drone creates this illusion of a thinker. Whereas if it was a thought and then 2 minutes later there's another thought, there would be no thinker. There would be no constant noise for one to think that there's something thinking the thoughts. And that goes along with what Krishnamurti said in that talk that I was mentioning, that there's nothing there. So when there's no inner, when there's no internal, when there's nothingness, there might be a thought, but it's not my thought. It's not I'm thinking a thought. It's just something external, just like the tree. And so I did kind of see what he was saying with that. And I thought of a question: why do we meet people with all of our problems? Why do we meet people with that background? Why don't we have a blank brain? The common brain of humanity, the common consciousness. And somebody in the group said, how do I be sane in this situation? And I was thinking about that in terms of mental health. Because if everybody realized that it's hard to be sane in this situation, there might be a little bit more compassion for those people that appear to go temporarily insane. And people brought up knowing what's going on, or the need to know what's going on in the world. And I was thinking, is that really what's happening? That's what it says in the news or some media, but is that really what's happening? And even if it is, that's what's happening somewhere, and it's a very small bit of reality. And it's not even a real bit of our reality because it's something we can't act on. In that way, it's sort of an outlier. And in science, they just ignore outliers. So perhaps it's something that it's good to be aware of that outlier, but they don't design their science and the rest of their life around the outlier. And it's an outlier. It's lying and getting us to believe it. And it's not that it's not true, but the more we put our awareness on it, it's just this food that is poisonous, and it's draining our energy that we have to act on things that are actual for us. And for me, I see the hummingbirds, that's actual. And that's going to change my neurophysiology in ways to see more hummingbirds in nature and be connected with that beauty and see beauty and have the brain attuned to beauty instead of all the toxicity in the world. And I brought up the example of listening to the news for 2 hours is not even as powerful as smiling at someone spontaneously for 2 seconds. Because that one thing is actual, whereas the other is feeding the incapacitation. There's capacity in smiling, whereas there's incapacitation in listening to things that we have no capacity to affect. And then we have our attention on that and less attention on the moment where we could have some kind of effect. It's mass distraction against our own brain. We're distracted from the present moment, which is the only place we have the power to act or do anything. And the other thing too is if we listen to the news for 2 hours, that is going to actually decrease the probability that we're going to smile at the next person we see. So it's going to get us so distracted that we're not in tune with our gestural apparatus, which is the thing that can actually do something. So I feel like focusing on problems decreases our responsibility in the moment, our ability to respond to the moment. We're responding to something programmed. It's programming, and that is altering our movements throughout the day. We're being warped by that programming. Responsibility has nothing to do with shuffling words in one's mind. If we have a river of words in our minds, we can't see the river and flow of light hitting our perception. I actually feel like words are trapped light. It's interpreted light and saving it for later in memory. And I actually realized that that's recorded holographically. So in a way, as we move through reality, when we record things in our memory, we're actually putting out this algorithm of a holographic net, which is gathering the light, the image, as well as the sound, which is the word interpretation of what that means. And the more we do that, the more we're only seeing those interpretations overlaid on the present moment, and we're picking that out holographically. And I feel like really we need to shed that algorithm of holographic recording in order to have a quantum brain, not having the interference of the interference pattern of the holographic memory that we have. And that's old light and old sound that is distorting our brain. Because it's old light and sound distorting, we can't see the relationships and possibilities and collapse wave functions. Because our wave functions are already being collapsed by the waves of light and sound that are old, the interference pattern. And I feel like when we think about social responsibility, if we think about it as problems out there and then we can't do anything about it, we're thinking we can't do anything about it, and that transfers into the moment. And then we don't act in the moment because we're busy reacting to the problems that we heard on the news, which are sounds and images we recorded in our minds. If our awareness is on thought, it's away from the moment, and then that is inaction because we can't act in the moment. So thought inactivates action. And somebody asked, where does action come from? And I feel like action goes with perception. And they were talking about action as opposed to reaction, or response as action as opposed to reaction. And to me, reaction is reacting to thought or acting based on thought programs, which is old. So it's reacting, acting out a program. And the question of freedom came up, and it's freedom to observe without choice, because choice is the judge. It's picking out the bits to react to. And somebody mentioned flow as non-separation and how it was seamless. And I wrote, it's seamless when the one that seems to stop seeming. And somebody mentioned it's superficial to stay separate. And superficial is relating based on the images of thoughts and reacting. And I see that the depth or the deep is being with the whole totality and being that and being as that. Then one is just that depth without having to think one is deep. Because the thinking is the surface and the depth is all of it, everything. So in a way, when we're carrying those thoughts and programs, we are that superficially, whereas if we're everything else to the exclusion of that superficiality, then we meet everything with that depth. And I was thinking about the Truman delusion, or how some people actually feel like they're on the Truman Show when they go into map consciousness. And I was sensing that that is when one actually connects with the fact that one is the watcher, one is the seer. One is that by which we see. But in that sort of sense, there's still a sense that I'm also that which I observe. So that's sort of when the observer is the observed, but it's a strange sensation, so we feel like maybe we're in a movie or something. We are the watcher watching ourselves. And I feel like seeing is required for response, for action. And I wonder if there's a happening that happens without saying what's happening or what happened. And when we're seeing based on our thoughts, which is not seeing at all, we can't see the messages from nature. We can't read nature. We can't read that richness. And when we can't read that richness because we're reading the past, then that's when everything else comes in. We are each a perspective of light and life. We are all life from our particular perspective. And we talked about looking at oneself, and I feel like it's more like looking as the self or the one self. And that means having a clear brain. If we all had blank brains as human beings, in terms of me and my desires and memories and stuff, we would all be able to see the same thing because we wouldn't have all these past things getting in the way. And so in that way, can we look as that one self, that one consciousness that we all are? And I had a sense that the dialogue was also self-dialogue, because it's just different aspects of the one self talking to the one self. And I feel like dialogues are living conversations. And it seems even in daily life we want to share meaning, but usually we end up having conversation about the meanings that we've been programmed to talk about on the news or on TV and things like that, because we can't see the messages and the meaning of our daily life. And if we could see that, we wouldn't talk about the past stuff and programs and all of this meaningless stuff that we think is meaningful, because we're bombarded with it. And we're bombarded with it so we can't see the present moment and see the meaning in the present moment and talk about that. And that would be dialogue. And I had this sense that human beings are dialogical creatures, or even that life is dialogical. It's having this dialogue with itself. And it is sharing meaning. And any interaction and communication, there has to be a sharing of some kind of meaning, whether it's at the energetic level or subatomic level or biological level. There has to be this understanding. There has to be this exchange of meaning, this flow of meaning. Yet, as humans in our daily life, we share and base it on the meaning. So the meaningless meanings we've been programmed with to talk about blind us, and that blindness prevents us from seeing meanings in the moment and sharing that. And so in terms of changing things, if we can't share meaning about the moment, nothing's going to change. Because if we're just sharing meanings about memories and things we're told are meaningful, they're no longer relevant. And somebody raised the question, do we need to step away from that? From our programming and image making and thoughts? And I feel like there's nobody there to step away from it. But also, when we see that we don't even step away from it, we just drop it, because it has no meaning. If we saw we were carrying around a rotten egg for the last 20 years and it was so rotten and disgusting, we wouldn't say, oh, should I hold on to it? Should I step away from it? We would just drop it. But the trouble is, we think those images and things still have some kind of meaning and value. Like, oh, maybe I can sell this rotten egg on eBay because I've been carrying it for 20 years. Maybe I need it in case one day I'm starving and I just happen to have this rotten egg. I can at least eat something. And I feel like, again, this holographic algorithm is this net that is recording the lights and sounds according to the past recording of light and sound. So it's just a slight variation, and it's just recording all the examples of that algorithm of what it is we're supposed to be making meaning of. And those things are meaningless, so then eventually we have this accumulated life and memories of all of this meaningless stuff. And that could be the allostatic load as well. And that's what needs to be dropped is that algorithm and and seeing that that algorithm has no value for recording and dropping it with all of its recordings. And it's kind of like, why don't we see that thought equals blah? It's blah, 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 and it's just blah, blah, blah. And can we realize when we're speaking and acting and reacting from the blah, blah, blah? Can we get to quantum perception? It's the quantum algorithm of seeing and collapsing the wave function into actuality, instead of continuing along the trajectory of dirt roads, which is dirty light and sound, all these old dirt roads in our consciousness. And I was actually thinking about Dr. Daniel Siegel's term allostatic load, and I actually think there could be a term called holostatic load, which is the accumulated light and sound images that we have recorded in our brain, and how that is stressful and it's a reaction, and those reactions cause emotions, which those molecules block receptors for absorbing nutrition. So by emoting based on this holostatic load, we're actually destroying our body and not seeing life. The holostatic load is the me and all of its recordings. And do we know when we're speaking from our holostatic load? Or are we speaking from the quantum dynamic perception that we have, the flow of light, and not capturing that light, not recording it, because it can't be captured, it can't be recorded. If we don't record it, we're seeing something new all the time. There's always something new. Even if we sat on a beach by ourselves for the rest of our life, if we had dynamic quantum perception, we would see something new continuously. And we would be that new. Our thoughts are touching us and guiding us or misguiding us, as opposed to our whole senses and perception. And I wonder, do we speak quantum, or do we speak holostatic load? And I feel like in order to speak quantum and dynamically, we first need to see possibilities, or relationship, or life, and speak as that life.